Welcome to the Minnesota Rovers Tuesday evening presentation. Minnesota Rovers is an outdoors club based in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Our members organize trips that range from 1 hour to 2 weeks in Minnesota or further afield. Examples of our activities include hiking, biking, backpacking, skiing, snowshoeing, paddling, and rock climbing. We also organize conservation and trail clearing trips. Our members have experience and skills in many outdoor activities, so if you want to learn a new outdoor activity, we can probably help you. For more information, go to mnrovers.org. Now let's move on to this week's presentation.
Tonight, our speaker is Ellery Malone. And Ellie grew up in Minneapolis. Her first camping experiences were with her family in the BWCA when she was just a little one, just 7. And she attended Camp Widgie in Ely for many years, became a camp counselor at age 19, and started guiding extended canoeing and backpacking trips in the American West and Canada, including the Boundary Waters, Bighorn Mountains, Sawtooth Mountains, and Wilmore Wilderness in Alberta. And last summer, she co-led a 40-day trip backpacking in Gates of the Arctic National Park in Alaska. Ellie is a graduate of the University of Vermont and has been working in the healthcare field. She'll be starting physician assistant school in Philadelphia this May, and I'm so glad you're here with us, Ellie, and go ahead with your talk.
Thank you. Well, it's good to be here. I'm just going to share my screen here to get the presentation started. And so I know you covered like a little introduction to me, but I have it again here. So again, my name is Ellery. I grew up like going to on Boundary Waters trips with my family, and then like going through a lot of the trips that YMCA Camp Widgie offers. They're based in Ely, Minnesota on Burnside Lake, so just right on the edge of the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota. And so it was a great place to like grow up camping and canoeing and hiking in the summertime. And this past summer, I led a 37-day trip, so almost 40-day trip in the Gates of the Arctic National Park. Gates of the Arctic is one of the least visited national parks, if you can believe that. And I co-led this trip also with Haley Reed. So I also want to give her credit on this trip. I did not lead this trip alone. But we both had been working on Widgie staff for the past 4 or 5 summers. And so there are trip regressions at this camp, and the culminating experiences like going on your Arctic trip, and that is talked about a lot. And so all of the participants on this trip, there were 4 girls on our trip, and they all had just graduated high school and were entering their freshman year of college. So it was kind of their culminating experience growing up, also going on these trips through Widgie. And so this picture I'm starting out here with is a tradition on these trips, is that everyone has like a hat that their group makes. And Haley's mom, who I co-led with, made our hat. So she knit that hat, and we like brought it on our trip, and it just is kind of a symbol of our trip now after the trip has ended. And they're hung up around the camp from all of the years and all the trips that have ever gone out. So that's just a fun symbol to start off this presentation. So I'll talk a little bit about the preparations and planning of this trip. It started basically a few months before last June when we left, and mostly what we thought about a lot was the route and how to plan a route in such a large area. And luckily we had a lot of resources and trip reports from past trips that just get passed down year to year. So it's a lot like word of mouth, and a lot of these trip reports that we can read through and see what people liked, see what people didn't like. A lot of it is also dictated where our pilots can drop us off at. There's different landing spots that they're able to land, and we fly out on like a bush plane to start the trip out there. And so yeah, there's different places that people can start. So we decided to start at Anaktuvuk Pass, which is a small native village. And it started when like 5 Nunavut families migrated there from Chandler Lake. And so they went east to Anaktuvuk Pass, and their lifestyle mainly like revolves around the migrating herds of caribou in the area and just living kind of off the land in that area. So it's a very small town, but that is where we started our journey, and I'll talk more about that later. And another big thing that we thought about was the food on this trip, and I'll have pictures of kind of what we ate and where we cooked later in the presentation, but we brought some of our food from our camp that we work at, so Camp Widgewagon, and then we also ordered the bulk of our food from Costco and Fred Meyer out in Alaska that we picked up once we got there. Again, like a lot of the route and the food ordering we could do ahead of time, but once we like actually got to camp in May, we tested out all of our gear that we brought. And then we only had 3 days together as a full group before heading out on this journey together. So we had been obviously talking and calling a little bit before then, but we really just had 3 days to finalize everything in camp, like in person together. And so we like had a pretty like organized schedule going into those 3 days, just making sure like no one forgot anything and everyone had all their layers and everything that they needed. And there's things that we go through, like talking about bears and bear safety, talking about like the first aid kit and safety on a trip that is this long, and then also just like how to prepare what to wear. A lot of the times we like to talk about wearing like wet clothes or hiking clothes and having layers for that, and then having like a dry and like in camp outfit. So that was kind of our thinking, like when we were packing for a trip like this. And then we talk a lot about like any goals that we have for the trip, just community standards, like expectations. It was a group of 6 of us, so it's a pretty small group to be with for about 6 weeks on this trip. So that's a little bit about the preparation and planning, and I'll go over some of the food and gear a little bit more later. One fun thing that kind of gets to happen on some of these Arctic trips is like reaching out to different brands or different outdoor gear stores that you really like, and just being like, we're a group of like 6 women going on this 6-week backpacking trip, like want and we love your gear. This is why this is really going to help us on this trip. Like, can you help us out? And so one fun thing that we got is these Merry People boots, and they sent all of us a pair. We got to choose which color that we wanted, and we had our hiking boots for during the day, but then these were great shoes to wear like in camp. The ground in the Arctic is very soggy, and the tundra has like a lot of moss, and it can hold water really easily. And so that was fun to have kind of matching boots on the trip, and it kept our feet warm and dry on the cold days. And then another fun thing that we got was some Laird protein bars. Like Laird Superfoods is a brand that Haley, my co-lead, really loved. So we reached out to them and we got some cool granola bars. And then obviously getting from Ely to Anaktuvuk Pass, where we started our trip, is a pretty long journey. So I'll kind of outline how we got there, and I have like some more maps that zoom in on the area, because yeah, a lot of that geography might be unfamiliar to people. So Ely is like in northern Minnesota, and we drove down to the Minneapolis airport. And then on that same day, we flew from the airport to Fairbanks in northern Alaska. And we stayed in Fairbanks for a couple days. We got all of our food from Costco and Fred Meyer's. And then after a couple days at Sven's hostel, where we stayed in Fairbanks, we drove about 8 hours up the Dalton Highway, and then stayed at Coyote Air, where our pilots flew us out to Anaktuvuk Pass, where we started this journey. So I'll go over that in a little bit more detail because I know that's confusing. So here's Minneapolis to Fairbanks, and we had a lot of baggage going into the airport. We each checked a bag. We traveled with another group. So we had a 6-person group, and then we traveled with another 6-person group. So you might see those people as well in some of these photos. So that was all of our luggage. Sven's base camp hostel is in Fairbanks right there. And then Coldfoot Camp is where Coyote Air is. And so you can see how much further north we still had to travel to get up there. This is at the hostel. Once we got all of our food, we brought a lot of bags from camp so that we could organize the food and bag it ourselves and not use like any bulky like grocery store bags, or we didn't use really any of the containers that the food comes in. We like rebagged and repackaged all of our food once we got it. So that was a big day of measuring out cups of pasta into bags and cups of rice and making sure that we had everything that we needed. As you might be able to tell in the picture on the right, there's like 3 separate piles. We had like 3 different loops on this trip. So each loop was about 12 days long. And so we started out with like 12 days of food. And then our pilots dropped food for us at 2 different points along the trip. So we got like a resupply of food on day 12 and then another resupply around day like 26, I would say 24, 26. So yeah, that was kind of the organization that went into that. And then the Dalton Highway is a highway that goes all the way from Fairbanks all the way to the Arctic Ocean. And it takes a very long time to drive up it because it is a dirt road. So we went from Fairbanks to Coldfoot that you can see on the map, and that took us probably about 8 hours. So you can only imagine like the long day of driving it would be to get all the way up to the Arctic Ocean on that highway. But it's a beautiful scenic drive. The Yukon River that you can see on this map is an amazing stop along the way, and so it helps break up the drive. And then here's some pictures. There's like, we were on this really big bus, and I think the people driving it are kind of like tour guides normally when they're not driving a group of 12 girls up to Coldfoot. So they like to talk a lot about like the scenery and where we were driving to along the way. So it was fun to get out and make the classic stops along the way as well. So that was a long drive up. And then we arrived at Coyote Air in Coldfoot, and they have like these small bush planes, and we were just getting everything packed up and ready to go. We had 6 people, and sometimes they split up groups to fly out 3 people and then another 3 people later, just because of the weight and everything. But we got lucky. All 6 of us got to fly out in this airplane here in this picture. Dirk and Danielle are the pilots that work at Coyote Air, and they call this airplane the Pumpkin. So that is a fun name, just with like the orange stripe and everything. As you can see, everyone's like wearing bug jackets. The mosquitoes get pretty bad, especially in June when we flew in. And so everybody had a bug jacket, and those get passed down year to year. A lot of the times, like through friends and through campers from the past years. And so it was nice. We got those from friends and just from camp for all of our participants there. And this was a view from the plane when we flew out. Yeah, and then here is a little route overview. We landed in Anaktuvuk Pass on July 2nd, and we got picked up at Galbraith Lake on August 7th. So that was the time of real hiking days last summer that we had, and then a few days of travel on either end of that. Yeah, and then as you can see, we resupplied on day 11 at Summit Lake, and then we resupplied on day 24 at Ula Lake. And so those were 2 points along our trip where we just got to like kind of repack all of our stuff, and they had dropped food for us, and I'll show a picture of that as well, just so you kind of get the idea of what like having your food dropped would look like. I'm going to show you like a route overview that we had on CalTopo, which is like a mapping website. So here's another image first for reference. Coldfoot is up there close to the top, and then Anaktuvuk Pass is where we flew. So that was like our last small little bit of travel before starting our trip. And this is like on CalTopo mapped out our different loops here. And I'm going to zoom in. We originally had a different plan for our second like loop of the trip. And I'll continue to kind of talk about the trip in like 3 different sections, just because like that's how it stands out in my mind. And we always like talk about it like, oh, this happened loop 1, this happened loop 2. So that's how I kind of think about it generally. So I hope that kind of makes sense with you all as well. So this is more zoomed in of our first loop. Yeah, so our first loop, we started out at Anaktuvuk Pass, and we had a lot of like big valley hiking in this loop, and we were just kind of getting used to the feel of hiking on this sort of ground. It's like mossy, uneven, kind of wet, marshy ground, and there's a lot of mosquitoes, a lot of bugs, like black flies. So the first like couple days are always just getting like really adjusted to hiking, as you can imagine. And it felt a little bit hard at the beginning, just like getting used to the hiking, and then also having like your packs probably at the heaviest that they will be throughout the trip. And then, yeah, we were along like pretty big river valleys along the Anaktuvuk River on this section, and we had a couple river crossings that we had, and when we cross rivers, usually with a group of 6, we would do like a formation of 3 people first, and then the next 3 people either in a triangle formation or just in a line, depending on how fast moving the river was. This is where we cooked. It's our bug tent, we call it. So this was like our little kitchen the whole time, and a little bit about like how we would set up camp. Last slide, you saw our 2 tents. So we had like 2 3-person tents, and then we had our bug tent. And just for bear safety, we use like a bear triangle formation, we call it. So like every night we would like set up where we wanted our tents to be, and then we would put our bug tent and like the place that we cooked like further downwind, so our tents were like upwind from it, so we like the smell of our cooking and everything wouldn't like blow up and hit our tents or anything like that. And then another, like the third corner of that triangle would be where we would store our food. And we have like a big blue tarp that we would wrap some of the food in, and then each person in their backpack would carry like a small bear canister. And so that was a great way to store food, is like using those small bear canisters as well. So we had our little kitchen cooking area, our food storage area, and then our tent area on this trip. And one thing that was very memorable from our first loop here too was some cold and rainy weather. And so one day we like were just basically in a cloud. So I'll play this little video here for you all. But this was kind of the view from the tents, and it was hard to like navigate sometimes when the mountains and the peaks that you would normally use to navigate were covered in this fog and in the clouds. And so that was just a memorable picture from that. Let me go next. Okay, and then another highlight I would say from our first loop here was going over Peregrine Pass. And we had kind of anticipated this pass. It was like towards the end of our first loop of the trip. And it was very rainy and very cloudy, like I had showed in that last video, for a few days before getting to this pass. And so by the time we got there, we were really ready for some like better weather. We were hoping that the clouds would clear, we could see the top of the mountain so that we could easily navigate up and over the pass safely. Unfortunately, it was very rainy and cloudy the first day that we got to the base of this pass. And so we kind of had like a layover day, we call it. We just like hung out, didn't hike. We were waiting for the clouds and the rain to clear up. And eventually it did, not until 9 p.m. though. And originally we were waiting to just hike up and over the pass until the next day. And we were like, oh, it'll be fine the next day. But at that point, we just like didn't trust the weather at all. So this was like our crazy idea, crazy moment where we decided to like hike up and over this pass at like 10 p.m. This would not be safe in pretty much anywhere else, but because the sun never sets in the Arctic in the summertime, it was like pretty much 24 hours of sunlight and daylight. We were able to hike it up and over the pass at about 10 p.m. And the next day it poured rain. So we were very, very thankful that we chose to do it that night as soon as the clouds like cleared up a little bit. And yeah, it was like a pretty memorable experience from the trip and probably a lot of people's favorite parts, even though it was a little bit scary at first to get down this like steep part of the pass. So I'll show a little video of what it was like getting down from the pass here. So what you're seeing is like scree, and that's just like really loose like clay rock. So you can easily like glide down it. And at first we thought it was going to be like us falling down the side of this mountain. We were like, oh my gosh, how are we going to get down this? But turns out scree is like super stable and also super fun to hike down. And we just kind of like skied down the mountain, we called it. And so that was a very fun night. I know that there's some things in the chat here. How heavy were your packs? So at the beginning, I would say they're probably around like 80 or 90 pounds, or at least like mine was. We definitely don't pack light. We like to have enough food, and our gear isn't like super ultra light. So it definitely like with 12-day loops, it would definitely be possible to have lighter packs than we did. But like the gear that Widgewagon packs out, and just like probably the amount of food that we were bringing, we were not ultralight. And we also just wanted to make sure everyone had enough layers and everything. So probably around 80 to 90 pounds. So yeah, very, very heavy. And then yeah, 24 hours of sunlight. We did buy everyone like the little like eye masks, eye covers. And so I think most people, and definitely I, slept with my eye mask on every single night. So that was super helpful. And you get kind of used to it. When I got back, it was like crazy to like have it get dark out. And your body's just kind of grows a little bit more accustomed to it. And how were we prepared for evacuation? So we had a satellite phone that we could use to call camp. And then we also had a Garmin inReach, so we could like text Dirk and Danielle, who are our pilots. We could text people from camp. We could like plot our location on the Garmin. So that was like our main contact if we needed an evacuation. Definitely in this terrain, like let's say somebody hurt themselves like on a mountain pass, you would need to get somebody down and like hike a little bit to get to a place where a plane could land. So there is like always that risk being in a pretty remote area. But I'll keep going, and you can put questions in the chat for sure, and I can always answer as many questions as there are at the end of this as well. So this was a picture kind of at the end of our first loop, the sun came out a little bit. There was a beautiful rainbow, and so we were excited to like start a new loop, and we got all of our new food. And yeah, we were just like excited to kind of end this like rainy and colder time of our trip, even though it was pretty fun. Also, something that happened our first loop was our bug tent that you saw in the first or one of the first slides. We had it set up one night. There was like a huge gust of wind, and the seam like totally ripped down the side of it. So it was like pretty much like we like kind of did like a quick fix with some trekking poles and like tried to still stand it up at night to cook under because it was pretty cold, but it was like pretty dysfunctional. So at our first resupply, we had more like needle and thread dropped for us. So this is like Haley and I just kind of sewing the edges of the bug tent together so that we could use it again on our next loop. So our second loop kind of looked like this. It was a funny little S shape. We like had to obviously reroute a little bit on this loop. But yeah, like the second half of this loop was another like favorite memory of the trip. So I'll kind of go into more detail what happened with this loop. Here's just some more pictures. We had like basically, so the main reroute that we had on this trip, the trip went very smoothly overall, but the water levels, because we had probably had just like a ton of rain, and it had been a late spring. And so our pilots, even before we left, kind of warned us that the water levels were a little bit higher in some areas because of this late snow melt year and late spring that they were having. So that just meant the rivers could rise and fall with the weather. And if we had gotten to the point on our second loop where we had to turn around maybe even a week later, maybe it wouldn't have been an issue, but we did need to reroute because of a river that we were unable to cross our second loop. And it always is like a pretty tough decision when you have to like to make that decision to like change your route and change your plans. Luckily, in our case, we were able to backtrack, not to like the backtracking wasn't too difficult. So we were able to stay on track with like our resupply being in the same location as we had originally planned. So that didn't change at all. And we did just like get some extra time to explore some cool areas that we wouldn't otherwise have gotten to explore, which ended up like being the best part of the trip. So I think like sometimes having to reroute is like a little bit demoralizing, and like having to backtrack obviously isn't the most fun. But yeah, there was just like a river crossing that was unsafe, and staying on the side that we had been hiking on was also unsafe. It like cliffed out, and trying to go like up and around also didn't work because then you were on like a cliff over the river, so that was also unsafe. So anyway, we turned around. We had to do a little backtracking that involved this, but everything worked out. There was like this, we call it kind of this like barren land creek section. It was called Barren Land Creek on the map, but you can see how steep the like mountain cliffs are, and we're like over a river right now. So like it's pretty easy to get like cliffed out on one side of a river if there's like not a wide enough riverbank on each side here. So kind of staying high to hike above some of the parts of the river that kind of got really gorgy was the safest option here. But this is one of our participants flying her kite, and we like to bring like some fun things. Obviously, we're not ultralight backpackers, so we brought a kite. This is another picture of our whole group. It was still rainy at this time in the trip. It had like gotten a little bit nicer right after our resupply, but it was a little bit rainy. And then when we did reroute, we had our first wildlife sighting of the trip. So from a very safe distance, we saw a grizzly bear mom and her cub, and that's the picture on the right. And then the picture on the left is of a muskox, and it's a little bit hard to tell. Both these pictures are kind of blurry and from far away, but a muskox has like very long hair and like kind of these horns. And they really only live in Arctic climate. So it's like very unique and like very special to be able to see one when we were on this trip. So now we get to like the bright and sunny, amazing weather part of the trip. So this is like a picture of our group from a day hike that we did after we rerouted. It was just like the most beautiful, one of the most like beautiful landscapes we had on the whole trip. And I think that like some of us were like, it was hard to like keep the morale up at points when it was like very rainy and very cold in the beginning, and then we had to reroute and it was still rainy and kind of cold, and now it got like really warm and sunny. So things were looking up for us for a little bit. And this is just us getting to this like beautiful mountain meadow that we got to day hike and explore in. And on the map, it shows that there's glaciers up near the mountain that we were looking at there, but they had all like melted away. So we didn't really see any glaciers, but we did get to play around in a fun mountain meadow here. And these are some more pictures. We got to swim under a waterfall here and just like hang out for the day. And then here's another picture of us doing a river crossing just to get like an idea of what the rivers look like there. And then this is our second resupply. We're at Ula Lake for this resupply, and so this kind of shows what a resupply looks like. They could either like cache the resupply, or there's a potential that we could see them in person. It is nicer. I'm gonna like move over here. I feel like it's very dark here. But it is nicer to have like the resupply waiting for us, because that just means that they kind of left all of our food in these canisters, and we could just take our time, and we could leave trash in the canisters for them to be picked up later. So that was really nice. We got to like sort through all of the food that they left, and then also just like put our trash back in the barrels so that they could pick it up later, and we didn't need to carry all of our trash or like leftover food that we had for the rest of the trip. So that worked out really well both times that we resupplied. And then this is Ula Lake. It was like one of the biggest lakes that we saw on our trip. Mostly we were just hiking along the rivers there. But this was Ula Lake. And so now this is an overview of like the third loop, or the third part of this trip. As you can see, we're in the Ula Valley hiking up towards this big lake, and then we kind of cut over into the mountains a little bit, and we ended our trip at Galbraith Lake. And as we're hiking up Ula Valley, one thing that you might notice is like the mountains are kind of like getting smaller or maybe disappearing a little bit. And this is like, we hiked right up to basically like the edge of the Brooks Range, where it turns into just the north slope. And before you get to the Arctic Ocean, the Brooks Range just kind of like dwindles off, and it's flatter until you hit the Arctic Ocean further north. And so that was a very cool moment of the trip where we were just hiking towards just like kind of like a flatter landscape off to the distance, but we're kind of still surrounded by mountains. So the landscape changed here a little bit. And then Galbraith Lake, where we ended our trip, is along the Dalton Highway. So we didn't fly out. of this trip, we hiked back out to the road. This is like another picture here, or another video. As you can see, like the sun is starting to dip down in the mountains more, and we were getting a little bit more of a sunset. We started our trip like very early July. We started hiking, and after the summer solstice, the days do start getting a little bit shorter. So it was never like completely dark, but we got like hints of like a sunset, and it got a little bit darker. Did we see and meet others in the park? Yeah, we saw another group hiking in our first loop. I think it was like day 5 or 6. And then we saw maybe like a group of 4 other people, probably around day 7. And so it was more in the beginning towards Anaktuvuk Pass, and everybody that we saw that we were crossing paths with was like hiking the opposite direction as us. And so they were all kind of hiking back towards Anaktuvuk Pass. So I think that is kind of like a popular spot to like start and end a hiking trip, because it is a little bit more accessible. And there is like a commercial flight, I think, from Fairbanks to Anaktuvuk Pass. And so we didn't have to, or if somebody is planning their own trip, you don't have to go through like Coyote Air, which is like the place that Camp Widgewagon uses to fly people out, but you could like even take a flight from Fairbanks to Anaktuvuk Pass. So I think that's why we were seeing a couple more groups in the beginning, but then after that, we didn't see anyone. Our typical mileage would range a lot. Typically it was between like 3 miles and 7 miles. It just really depended on the day and also the terrain. If we had like a big river crossing or like a few like smaller river crossings, like those always take a lot more time to like scout out a safe place to cross. And so not every day was like a push day, but every day was like felt pretty hard, just like with differing terrain. So it was hard to say like the typical range, but it was from between like 3 miles and like 7 or 8 miles probably was the most that we hiked in a day. Okay. And we saw a little bit more wildlife. Towards the end of our trip, we saw a fox, and then here's another picture of fireweed, which is a really popular flower in the mountains here in Alaska. So we liked being able to see the pretty wildflowers. We saw a lot of caribou antlers. So this is like one photo of caribou antler, but we would see them. There's a couple herds of caribou in this region, and it was fun. Like at first it was like, oh my gosh, we saw caribou antlers, and then it was like almost every day we saw caribou antlers. And so yeah, that is just one picture of what they look like. And then this is towards the end of the trip at Anaktuvuk Lake. And as you can see, like off in the distance, you don't really see a ton of mountains out there, but we were getting closer to the North Slope towards like the end of our trip at this point. And there was a lot of wild blueberries beginning of August. And so we got to pick some blueberries, and we made like a fun blueberry cobbler, little blueberry pie towards the end of our trip. So that was like a great treat for all of our hard work, and it felt good to like have some fresh fruit towards the end of the trip when we'd been having like a lot of dehydrated fruit and like dehydrated vegetables and all of that. And it got a lot warmer at the end of our trip as well. It was like hard to imagine ever being so cold, honestly. We would like take off our packs and like immediately sprint into the river at the end of the day because we were so hot, and we barely even needed the bug tent. There was like less mosquitoes, and a lot warmer towards the end of our trip. So here we're like not even cooking inside of the bug tent, but just like enjoying cooking outside here. The day and night temps, it's hard to like say exactly. I think during our third loop, it was like probably around like 70 degrees and sunny. It was like beautiful during the day. And at night, it definitely got below freezing a couple times, or just about freezing, I think. So maybe it got down to like 40 or maybe like 35 for sure. But I don't think people were like people didn't get super cold at night. We like almost everyone had like a pretty warm sleeping bag and like a sleeping bag liner, or like some people just like, I know I slept in like my fleece pants and fleece a lot of the time because it was pretty cold. Yeah, we were able to maintain our body weight. I don't think anyone on this trip like felt like they like lost a lot of weight or anything. I think we all like gained some muscle, but we do like bring a lot of food on this trip. Usually like we have like some sort of like oatmeal or oat breakfast, or we have like hash browns, and we add like texturized vegetable protein to almost every meal. So we have like chicken TVP, or like just like unflavored TVP that we put in pasta, or sausage TVP that we would eat with like hash browns in the morning. And we had a lot of like granola bars and snacks, like cheese and sausage and tortillas and peanut butter and crackers. And we made different trail mix. So that was kind of what our lunch looked like every day. And then we had for dinners like a lot of like rice meals. We had like dehydrated beans. We had the texturized vegetable protein in every dinner. We had like lentil soup. We had like a curry. We would make like little pizza flatbreads. So each loop, like we kind of had the same had the same meals, or like a similar rotation of meals. So it was like by the end we were ready to ready to mix it up. But I think we kept a good variety. And filtering all the water. We actually didn't filter our water on this trip. We brought iodine to purify our water if needed, but because we were in such a remote location, we just like didn't need to. And like taking water from like a fast moving river, it's just like glacial runoff and ice. And so that was definitely a luxury on this trip, and not having to worry about the water purification as much. The group's most favorite piece of gear, most regrettable piece of gear, definitely the bug tent failed us a little bit on the trip. We kept having to sew it back up even after like that first time, but it was definitely nice to still have it. I think it was still important to us. And I don't know, other than that, the most regrettable piece of gear. I'm trying to think of like something that was kind of heavy that we didn't really use that much. Um, that's a hard one because it felt like by the end of the trip we like had used every single thing that we brought. So it's really hard to say. The favorite piece of gear. I just like love my puffy jacket, so I think like that's my favorite piece of like clothing item gear. And then also having like a crazy creek, a little seat to sit on. The like Arctic is the tundra is pretty damp, so having like a little chair, like a little crazy creek, that was probably like my favorite. Being able to like sit on that, cook dinner, and relax. That was really nice. And the group dynamics, yeah, there was only 12 or there was only 6 of us. The bus picture was 12. Yeah, there was another Widgie group that took another route. So they started and ended on the same day as us, but they were in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and we were in Gates of the Arctic. So both mountain ranges are part of like the Brooks Range. Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is just like not a national park, and it's on the other side of the Dalton Highway and like at the other side of the Brooks Range. And the group dynamics, they were really fun. I think we did a lot of work to like just get everyone comfortable, get everyone to like talk to different people on the trip. Three out of the four participants had all been on the same trip together before. And so just like making sure everyone felt like very included was key. And they were like super good about that. And they were like, they're all 18. So I think they like knew how special of an experience that this was. And they like really made an effort to make everyone feel really comfortable and like be friends with each other. And like we still all talk this day. So we're still like all pretty close. We don't hate each other after spending 6 weeks together. And how much did we stock our first aid kit? So luckily Camp Widgewagon has a health pro and a health pro assistant, and they take care of a lot of the first aid kits. We definitely go over everything. We talk about the first aid kit, we take everything out, we make sure we have everything before leaving for the trip, but it is kind of a luxury to not have to like go out and find all of these things to put into our first aid kit. So we did have like on these longer trips, we have like a round of antibiotics if somebody like got an infection and needed antibiotics. We have like epinephrine and Benadryl and like a lot of Band-Aids, gauze, everything that you would expect in a first aid kit. Luckily, we didn't need to use a ton from it. We just had some like minor scrapes, and like we used the like ACE bandage for wrapping someone's knee whose like knee was hurting, just as like an extra little brace. We only had like minor injuries and scrapes, and so that was like super lucky. And we didn't have any close encounters with bears. Luckily, we did see 6 bears on this trip, which I thought was kind of a lot, even though we were there for like 36 days. That's definitely a lot. Like I think the closest that we got was like the mom bear and her cub. And so like that was like probably the most nerve-wracking one too, because like seeing a mom bear and her cub is just like the mom bears are very protective, and like you just don't really want to mess with that. So just like keeping our distance and like standing our ground, and we all hiked very close together for that safety reason. And there's like bushes and willows, and so sometimes it's like hard to see above those at points, and so just like making a lot of noise while we were hiking through like more like bushy areas and low visibility areas was like very important. And we also had a bear spray for each person in our group, and that was like something that they recently changed. Like earlier when I was leading trips, it used to be like at least have bear sprays for half the amount of people in your group, but now it's like every single person needs to have one and hike with it. So that was also helpful to like feel safe from the bears. Yes, everyone brought trekking poles. Not everybody used them every day. I was not somebody who hiked with trekking poles often until this trip, and I hiked with them like every single day. It was super helpful on like the uneven ground, spots where you're just like feeling like almost like the ground is like sucking you in, and you're like, I just want to like keep going. The trekking poles are very helpful, and it's like, especially with a super heavy pack, it's like really helpful on your joints and everything. It's good like for river crossings. The person in the front and the back of the river crossing would be holding one, and then we would be like holding hands in between that. So big trekking pole fan now after this trip. Any safety precautions for managing women while menstruating? Yeah, so I know that in the past, some people have like gotten these, oh, I forget the company now, that sent like little like bags that had little like wipes and like a little like trash bag. And everybody on our trip, oh, Anamosa bag. Anamosa bag is something that I've heard works really well. And like what camp provides, or like what a lot of people do, is just like have a blue bag, and it's just like a blue like colored bag, and so everyone has one for like personal waste, or even if like you're using a Band-Aid and it got bloody or something, put it in the blue bag. And then we had one for like each resupply, so it was nice to be able to throw away trash and stuff for something like that. But yeah, having your own like little personal trash bag, and then just like keeping it sealed and keeping it like in the blue tarp where we like have like our food storage area every night was something that we did. Okay, I think that's all the questions for now, and I'm almost done here, so I can answer a few more at the end. But this is just like another picture of like what these like big open valleys look like, and this is like a little bit of a smaller river that we were camped near one night towards the end of our trip here. And then again, just like this was when, as we were kind of hiking out towards Galbraith Lake and turning around and like seeing these like outlines of these mountains that we had just been in for the past like 36 days, and that was pretty cool. And then we made it to Galbraith Lake. So this was like a campground along the Dalton Highway, and it was like a little bit weird to show up, and like we were able to, you know, there was like a truck there, and we were like, okay, we're back on the road here, back in civilization, even though it was like very far north on the Dalton Highway. So this is just our group again, like on our last night camped there. We got picked up on the Dalton Highway at Galbraith Lake, and then it was about like a 10-hour drive back to Fairbanks that day that we got picked up. We also picked up the group that we traveled with on the highway slightly south of where we got picked up also. So we were like the furthest north group to get picked up, and then we drove down, picked up the other group, and then we stopped and got like a road trip bag that we had stored at Coyote Air in Coldfoot, and then we kept driving down to Fairbanks and then stayed at the same hostel that we started our trip from in Fairbanks that night that we got picked up. This is like the little outside of Coyote Air. It's like they have this little cabin, and we met Jean Aspen, who is like a celebrity in our minds, but she is like a 70-year-old now, and she was also going out on her own 6-week adventure, but she was alone, and she was like base camping from a cabin and kayaking the whole summer. And so we like met her at the beginning of our trip at Coyote Air, and we got to hear a little bit of her story, and she actually has like 2 books and a documentary, and she's a really cool person. So that was kind of a fun person to meet before starting our trip. And she was super, super nice and wanted to like talk with us and take photos with us. And she wanted to email us after our trip and hear about our adventures. And she like went out to the Brooks Range for a full year and like built her own cabin and just like lived out in the Brooks Range. So she also has a pretty cool story. And I read her book, Arctic Daughter, after getting home from our trip. So that was just like a fun, like you never know who you're going to meet along the way. And she just kind of like inspired us on this trip a little bit. Let me see in the chat here. The colorful boots, any footwear issues? We definitely like had our hiking boots that we hiked in every day pretty wet. Like we would do river crossings in them, like they were kind of our wet shoes. Luckily we didn't have like any boots that broke or anything like that. I'm not gonna lie, I got like a really bad ingrown toenail, and so that was like definitely from just like having continuously wet feet and just like wearing these boots for just such an extended amount of time. And it was like pretty painful, but it was like very, very much like towards the end of the trip. So it wasn't like a huge complication, but it was like, um, I like was able to deal with it and it got better, but it definitely was not fun. So definitely your like blisters could come up, and people had worn in their boots before the trip, so not a lot of people were having issues with their blisters or boots too much, but we were definitely like sore and our feet hurt a lot of the times. Towards the end we were like just kind of our bodies were like a little bit done with the hiking after 37 days. um and yeah, our trail footwear, um just hiking boots during the day. Um, I've like worn the Loa Renegade hiking boots like on for the past like 5 years, and I love them. And then we were wearing like the Merry People little like rain boots that were waterproof in camp at night. And if I'm like in the Boundary Waters or something, I'll like bring tennis shoes or like an old pair of tennis shoes and just wear those. Like just on this trip, like you step and you kind of like step into a puddle a lot of the time, just from like permafrost melting and stuff on the in the tundra. And so just having like waterproof shoes at night also was like super important. And we usually don't let people bring open-toed shoes, so like any chacos that people wanted to bring to like swim in weren't really allowed. Like I know people have brought Crocs in the past to like put on like just to swim or like right after they swim. But really we try to like just swim in our hiking boots also, because they're wet anyway, and it's just like safer in terms of like not getting a scrape or anything like that on your feet. And the colorful boot brand is called Merry People Boots. So I'll spell it out. Oh,
Can I
yes.
ask a question?
Yeah, definitely. I'm
So, um, what, how did you, I know that you guys had maps. How did you navigate? Did you look at the mountains and look at the map and use the compass, or how did you do that?
Yeah, the maps that we brought were like quads, just like topographic maps, quads that we called them. And they were pretty accurate with in like in terms of like where the mountain peaks were, where the rivers were and everything like that. So yeah, we also had two compasses that we brought, and then just kind of oriented ourselves on the map, and then it's like pretty easy to navigate just looking at the peaks and the different mountains, and um, where you are like along the river as well. Just because you can see just like forever. And there's nothing blocking your view of like the mountain peaks. So like I've been places where it is like, oh, there's all these trees and I have no idea where I am on the map because I can't see the mountain to my left or my right. But it's like here, it's so wide open. It's almost like easier to navigate than some other places that I have been, because you can like really, really see like what's around you. And so it's not that confusion of like, oh, I can't see this, or this is like blocking my view. Like the one day that we had like really low clouds and it was super cloudy, it was like kind of a guess, like you kind of follow the river because you're like, I know I'm in the correct valley right now. And then when the clouds clear, you can tell more where you are. But yeah, we didn't really have moments where we were like lost necessarily, but we had moments where we were like, which should we stay to the left side or the right side of the river? Like, because where is like the terrain going to be like the easiest and like not cliff out or like things like that. So that is just like a little bit trial and error. And there's moments where we were like on the right side, and then we're like, no, we should really be on the left side of the river. Like, let's cross the river. And like, that's a lot easier hiking on that side. Yeah. So kind of figuring it out along the way. But yeah, does anyone else have any questions? I know that there were some.
I have one more.
Yeah.
What was your first meal off trail?
That's kind of a funny one. Like we were on the this like big bus down back to Fairbanks, and there's like one place to stop in Coldfoot. So it was like we had like hash browns and sausage or a a burger people ordered. It was like a place where it was like a trucker stop in Coldfoot. So that was like the first meal. But when we got back to Fairbanks, we like went to the grocery store and got a lot of fresh food, and made like a fun salad and had avocados and had some grapes. Like it was like anything that we wanted to buy before we like had our flight back to Minneapolis. We were buying it.
Any more questions for Ellery? A lot of great questions so far.
Well, thank you all so much, like for letting me share about this experience. Like I hadn't been able to talk a ton about it like since the fall to people who knew that I went on this trip. So it was really fun to kind of get to talk about it in a more formal way where people are interested in hearing like not just like the cool pictures of it, but like what are the logistics? How do you make this like into a reality? So it's fun to talk about. So thank you all for listening.
Well, thanks for coming out tonight. That was a great trip. And that's even something rovers might do. So
You
thanks
should.
for giving us some ideas.
Thanks for watching this Minnesota Rovers presentation. If you want to see more, please click on the link to our channel or the subscribe button below. Thank you.